Okay, I think we should get going. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Adam Bookman. I'm a partner at Propelics, and I'll be your moderator for this webinar on wearables in the enterprise, looking beyond the hype. This is a great topic. We have an excellent, huge crowd joining this webinar. I think there's a lot of excitement around the possibilities for wearables in the enterprise and what can be done and how to get started. Nitin, we have a great speaker who's been following the wearable space really since the beginning. I'm going to introduce him in a minute. Wanted to just cover a few ground rules before we begin, just so everyone knows this webinar is being recorded, and the recording and the actual slides for this presentation will be made available right as soon as they compile, either today or tomorrow morning. I'll send out an email to everyone with a link to grab the slides. They'll be up on our website. If you want to follow some great conversations, recommend that you follow us at Propelics on Twitter. Getting into the webinar, there are a lot of questions that came in during the registration process. There, of course, is the ability to ask questions in the Q&A section. So please ask questions. I see that there's a bad echo. Sorry to hear that. Maybe this is a little bit better. I'm going to hand it over to Nitin in a minute, and I think we did some audio checks, and he had some great audio, so I really hope that that's the case. So ask questions along the way or send us a chat, and we'll answer them. We'll be able to answer them. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that there's going to be a special offer that we're introducing around wearables in the enterprise at the end of this, so stick around for that. But just getting right into it, wanted to, for those of you who don't know Propelics, I saw a lot of very familiar names on these calls on our monthly webinar series, so thanks for coming back. For those of you who are new, welcome. Propelics is a company that creates mobile strategies and world-class apps for the enterprise. We're doing quite a bit with emerging technologies around wearables, around beacons and location and context, and a lot with just traditional mobile app development for phones and for tablets. We work with some of the world's largest brands. We work globally. We're based in San Jose, California, with offices in Boston and Pittsburgh and a development center in Guadalajara, Mexico. We're 100% focused on mobile in the enterprise. We also provide some pre-built mobile applications that can help you get going very quickly. The bulk of our work and the way that we typically start with our clients is with our strategy services. We focus on the business side and on the IT side. On the business side, we do a lot of work around the art of the possible around mobile, around how to get going, how do you know if you have good ideas for apps, for wearables, for mobile technology, what makes a good idea, how do you prioritize ideas as they come in, and we have a really nice framework for building out mobile app roadmaps. We work with IT teams on making sure that they're ready for the wave of mobile that's coming their way. We do quite a bit of work around IT maturity for mobile and providing plans to attack mobile, because mobile breaks down so many silos and barriers when it comes to an enterprise, from the infrastructure side to the application development side to IT, all the way to marketing, to branding, to legal, to HR, to your governance teams. So mobile's really a silo breaker, and it's a little bit of a different animal when it comes to IT, and sometimes it's hard to get ready for it. We do quite a bit of work now around mobile center of excellence creation. And then when it comes to app development, we do great work around mobile app prototyping and even some wearables prototyping. And we provide services, managed services around mobile app development, mobile testing, mobile support, and even manage mobile center of excellence. If you want to learn more about Propelics, go to propelics.com and feel free to contact us. So that's the end of the About Propelics. Wanted to get right into this exciting webinar on wearables in the enterprise. So I want to introduce to you Nitin Bhatia. He's a senior mobile strategist at Propelics. Nitin is a technology enthusiast with several years of consulting experience working with companies across very many verticals to craft solutions focusing on delivering value, including some very, very new technologies. Nitin has written many articles on wearables in many publications. A lot of them are posted up on our blog if you just want to read about wearables in the enterprise. So we're really excited to have Nitin here. He's been thinking a lot about wearables and really following this space. So Nitin, I'm going to pass control over to you, and welcome.
Excellent. Thank you, Adam. So before we get started, I wanted to quickly go through the agenda for today's talk. We'll start off by spending a few minutes on understanding the wearables landscape and how it's shaping up to be today. And then for the majority of the time, want to focus on discussing some real-world use cases and how organizations are using wearables today and what are some of the benefits. Of course, wearables also comes with its fair set of challenges, so we'll touch on those. And towards the end, we'll talk a bit about how you can kind of start thinking about wearables for your organization and leave some time at the end for any questions. So the wearables landscape, as we know it, is fairly in its early days, and it continues to evolve day by day. Every single day you go onto any technology blog or any technology publication, it's hard not to hear about some novel application of a wearable device or some announcement of a new wearable software or hardware, or perhaps some new laws that that's trying to govern certain aspects of wearables. So it's fairly kind of constantly evolving pretty quickly. And so far, wearables have had applications across an array of sectors, as you can see from this infographic. Everything from security to fashion, and each sector has different form factors, different types, and different kinds of wearable applications and wearable devices. Everything you could see from the more I would want to call it consumer types like wristbands and smartwatches to contact lenses and wearable tattoos. So everything under the sun is fair game right now with wearables. And of course, there are, with any new kind of market picking up, there are several analyst projections about the growth of the wearable market. It ranges anywhere from the single-digit billions all the way up to $50 billion over the span of the next few years. And honestly, despite such optimistic projections, in 2012, the market penetration for wearables in the U.S. Was just 18%, according to Markets and Markets. Although this number is, for the pace at which wearables is moving, it's slightly dated. Wearables have yet to gain mass adoption amongst consumers, and we could kind of talk about that for an entire hour on why that is, but I think I'd rather focus on kind of the enterprise space. So the enterprise space is filled with multiple opportunities for wearable applications, and it could possibly be what takes wearables from an experimental device to a business tool. So before we get into that, let's understand where are we today. Wearables in the general sense have been around for centuries, dating as far back as the 17th century, actually. But wearables as we know it today kind of started off in the consumer space with health and fitness devices from Fitbit, Jawbone, Misfit, Nike, and several others. Over the last few years, the market for these devices has grown significantly, along with other categories like clothing, shoes, jewelry, watches, glasses, you name it. The main focus of these consumer devices is to have a very simplistic look and feel, very clean design, and tons of personalization in sizes and colors and so on and so forth. So the wearables that are designed for consumers mostly tackle simple use cases like show me how many steps I've taken today, or notify me about an email or a message or a certain alert that I'm receiving on my smartphone. And the key to the success of some of the devices in this space is the simplified user experience. Wearables in the consumer wearables for the consumer are fairly low on the maturity curve, and they rely really heavily on the smartphone to deliver the complete experience. So let's contrast that with let's contrast that with kind of how things are going in the enterprise space. The enterprise wearables market has several established manufacturers like Motorola, Google, as well as startups like Vuzix, Bionym, and Thalmic Labs. The pace of innovation at which the enterprise space is moving has significantly grown, and we're starting to see devices that are standalone, that don't require a smartphone, or devices that have significant capabilities of handling sophisticated use cases. And instead of these devices focusing on the look and feel and the personalization, the manufacturers are ensuring that these devices are feature-rich, as well as capable of integrating with enterprise backend systems. Amongst others, manufacturing, oil and gas, and medical are the three industry verticals where we're seeing the most activity. So with all this recent development, it's hard not to think how wearables will impact your organization. And although it's still in early stages of maturity, organizations should start thinking about how they can leverage wearable technology to either create new ways of doing business or redefine existing business processes to create differentiation. I'll now walk through 4 companies that are doing exactly that. The first company we're going to talk about is Virgin Airlines. Virgin is a company that's always looking to do things a bit differently and see how they can push the boundaries using technology. So when they conducted a survey of 10,000 worldwide travelers, about 42% of them said that the travel experience was less glamorous today than what it used to be. And we'll try and not blame the air hostess for that. So after testing a few different technologies, Virgin decided to launch a 6-week pilot program with Google Glasses alongside with the Sony smartwatch in February of this year in an effort to improve the end-to-end travel experience. So the way it works is it all begins when the customer's limo arrives at the terminal. The customer is greeted by the Virgin airline agent, and the customer provides the agent with his or her registration number. So once the agent has a registration number, all relevant passenger information is pushed down to the glass. And now the agent can provide the passenger with personalized assistance, such as changing their seat perhaps, or providing them with baggage tags, or even arranging for a flight change if they're going to miss their connecting flight. So, of course, with any pilot program, it did run into some early challenges with things like battery life or connectivity, or even just the agents getting used to this new way of interacting with the information while trying to keep the customer engaged. But Virgin managed to iron out most of these kinks, and they achieved several benefits from this program. Having all the information at the fingertips, the agents can now provide with more personalized service to the upper class passengers. So this information can also help the agent be a little more proactive. So if they know that a passenger is going to miss their connecting flight due to weather, they can immediately book them on the next earliest flight, or possibly even reroute them before they take off. Now that's definitely a plus in my book. Also, having the information right there allows the agents to be more efficient through the travel process. So be it the check-in process or the boarding process or the special requests, because these agents are not having to move from computer to computer to handle these requests, or switch between multiple applications and disengage from the customer during that process. The next company that's using wearables to its advantage is the Container Store. The Container Store has a reputation for providing great customer service, if any of you have visited the store. And they're always looking to further improve that by empowering their employees with the information that they need. So they realized the existing walkie-talkie systems in the stores that the employees were using was generating way too much chatter, just the way that the walkie-talkie technology works. It's more of a broadcast versus, a tap on the shoulder. And a lot of times the employees would typically either tune out what was being kind of talked about over the walkie-talkies, or they would turn them off because it was too distracting from what they were trying to do. And as a result, the important information that employees would typically get from the walkie-talkie systems was lost. They were not getting that information. The other thing that the walkie-talkie system was not capable of doing is allowing employees to collaborate in smaller groups, which was happening more often than not. And the employees would deter from doing such a thing because they would find it either too distracting, or the other employees were getting too distracted. So to address this issue, the Container Store looked at several alternatives. Actually, they looked at tablets, they looked at smartphones, and they landed on Theatro. It's the wearable device, as you can see up on the right-hand side of the slide. It's a really simple wearable device that employees clip onto their clothing. This matchbox-sized device runs 9 hours before needing to be recharged, and operates on voice commands mostly. So when an employee walks into the store for their shift, they would pick up one of these devices, they would clip it onto their clothing, press the gray button that you see in the center, and say, "Log on, John Smith." And that, in essence, is the employee clocking in. It's so simple. The device also has a button on the side in case the employee did want to broadcast messages to everyone in the store, just like a walkie-talkie typically would do. But a majority of the conversations were taking place using specific employee names or group names. The Theatro, it actually leverages the store Wi-Fi and the Theatro cloud to transmit these messages within a store or across stores, across multiple stores in the country if you have multiple locations. So far, the Container Store has been really, really happy with the results of the pilot program. And it plans to roll out this technology to all its stores over the next few years. The wearable devices allow employees to easily direct conversations to a specific person or a group, as I mentioned earlier, instead of broadcasting it across the network. And this has significantly reduced noise across the wire as much as 60%. That's pretty good. The Theatro device also allows employees to connect with other employees, not just within the store, but across different stores. So now you have your knowledge base is not just within your store, but it's across multiple stores. And the most important of them all is that the device is invisible to the customer, and that was very, very important to the Container Store when they were looking at what devices could make this use case possible. They looked at tablets and smartphones, but most of the time the customer service agent was too busy, kind of heads down, versus interacting with the customer. The Theatro allows the employee to maintain that eye-to-eye contact with the customer even while they are working through their request. So, of course, again, they did run into some early challenges, and one of the biggest one was the heavy reliance of this entire system on the store's Wi-Fi. They did bring in some Wi-Fi experts, they reconfigured some access points, but if in the case internet were to go down, the system would essentially become handicapped. And this is a gap that the Container Store is currently working with the vendor, and they hope to have a solution in place by the end of this year. So it'll hopefully make it a much better solution by the end of this year. So next we have Disney. So let's see how Disney is taking advantage of wearables today. So Disney is always looking to constantly provide that magical experience to boys and girls around the world. And up until last year, it was all but magical for the parents. The stress and anxiety that that parents go through to get their children on their favorite rides, the meet and greet with the favorite characters was often exhausting. Not to mention, the parents having to split up to get fast passes or during rider swaps and things of that. It was chaos. The folks at Disney recognized this, and after a 2-year pilot program, they actually rolled out the Magic Band, what they call, to all Disney parks. The pilot program was designed to take away all the planning and the running around for tickets and passes and make it a magical experience, not just for the children, but also for the adults. So the way it works is when a family purchases their tickets for their trip to a Disney park, they make all the reservations and purchases up front. This would be things like the room reservation, fast passes for a specific ride, special meetings with characters. They could even pre-purchase tickets for parades, fireworks. They could pre-purchase their meals and things like that. And at the end of it, once they finish the purchase, Disney would actually mail out personalized Magic Bands. So the Magic Bands would have each family member's name on it at no charge ahead of time. So when the family arrives at the park, there's nothing for them to worry about. They don't have to kind of run around. They don't have to purchase anything. And it's a pretty seamless process. Everything, all you need is a Magic Band, and you're good. So according to some sources, the price tag for this rollout was approximately $1 billion, but the benefits have already starting to pay for it. As we know, having detailed information about their guests makes it very easy for Disney to create their one-of-a-kind experience that it tries to sell to families. Disney can also leverage Bluetooth capabilities in the Magic Band to figure out which areas of the park need more personnel and how they can divert traffic to clear up any congestions or reduce queuing time. This efficiency has actually allowed Disney to accommodate 3,000 additional daily guests during their busy holiday season. And not only that, Disney has also seen a significant increase in the amount of time families are spending in the park, as well as an increase in the dollars spent at the park. That's phenomenal. Jay Rasulo, Disney's chief financial officer, actually mentioned on one of the investor calls, when you make things easier, people tend to spend more time on entertainment and much more time on consumables, be it food, beverages, merchandising, and etc. So that's definitely a huge plus for Disney. And of course, let's not forget about analytics. Having access to all that data about the guest, things like what rides are more popular, which food items are ordered the most, which merchandise is sold the most, and much more, not only allows Disney to create that personalized experience that I was talking about earlier, but it also helps them with logistical decisions, which significantly increases their efficiency and reduces their cost. So that's really great. And finally, we have the world's largest oil services company, Schlumberger. One of the biggest challenges for Schlumberger was the budget overruns, and this was primarily due to the oil field workers waiting around, and the oil field workers have a very complex and messy and dangerous job. So these workers would often get stuck on a task or not have the adequate material or information to complete the task, which would lead to these budget overruns. And Schlumberger realized that traditional technology like smartphones or tablets would get in the way of the oil field workers, because typically, these guys are working in a really messy environment. They have greasy hands, or they're using gloves, which makes it kind of impossible to use a smartphone or a tablet. And moreover, they probably need the two hands to do their job more efficiently instead of holding a smartphone or holding a tablet in the other hand. So to address the issue, Schlumberger decided to partner with Google's Glass at Work program, and they launched a pilot, I think last year, to help oil field workers kind of get through their daily tasks and checklists. So the biggest benefit of the pilot program was the ability for the oil field workers to get the information right there in front of them when they needed it most. If a worker was stuck on a certain task, they could easily request live assistance from an offsite expert who can kind of walk them through the process, or perhaps they could quickly watch a training video that just to refresh their memory, and then they're good to go. The wearables, the key thing here is the wearables fit well with how the workers were gathering information. So they didn't have to input any information with their hands. They didn't have to fiddle around with Google Glasses. It was all done by leveraging, voice commands, the camera to take pictures and videos, and even voice memos. So this made them much more efficient instead of, trying to fiddle around with a smartphone or a tablet. Also, the management had access to a lot of analytics about the workers' performance. This essentially, so if a task were to take 2 minutes and it ended up taking 30 minutes for a worker, then the management can identify those issues earlier on, because time is money, especially when it comes to large and complex projects. And they could easily address them by giving the oil field workers additional training or clarifying certain things, maybe additional coaching, or teaching them how to get live assistance while they're out in the field. And this would definitely identify any project overruns or any kind of delays much earlier on that the project manager can address. So one of the challenges with this pilot program was, and one of the biggest concerns for Schlumberger was security. And we'll talk about some of the challenges, generic challenges across the board. But for Schlumberger, the consumer version of the Google Glasses would typically route enterprise data over to the Google servers, and that was just not acceptable for Schlumberger, and I'm sure many other companies out there. So Google was able to customize, kind of create a customized version for Schlumberger. So with this customized version, the glass did not have access to any consumer-facing apps. It did not send any data over to Google servers, and all the data collected was stored internally kind of internal to the enterprise. So all the data stayed within the enterprise. This version also allowed Schlumberger to add a custom dictionary, which kind of helps when they're using a lot of these industry-specific terminology with their voices. So it was definitely very, very helpful to add the custom lingo to the software. So apart from so today we kind of highlighted 4 different companies that are using wearables, but there are many companies out there that are experimenting with wearables in a variety of ways. We looked at Virgin and Disney and how they're using wearables to improve their customer experience. And there are other applications around assisted training and medical centers at Stanford, University of California, University of Alabama. There are programs around employee wellness that leverages data collected by fitness devices like Fitbit and Jawbone. And of course, mobile payments has been something that several companies like Google, SoftCard, PayPal have tried to crack in the past. And now wearables could be the platform that brings it all together. So the purpose for this webinar was to focus on the real world applications, but I think we should spend some time kind of taking a glimpse into the future. There are several hardware as well as software vendors who have created some very futuristic proof of concepts. This one is from SAP and Music. This is the M100 wearable. You can see a picture of that on the top right hand of the slide. And it's a glass-like wearable that integrates with SAP kind of backend systems to provide users with the information they need right in front of them. So the picture on the left that you see on the slide is what a forklift operator would see when he or she is on the floor. So the information that they would see is item location, route optimization, order fulfillment notification and statuses, and even real-time floor traffic flow. So if there were a forklift around, it would give him an alert saying there's a forklift approaching you. So that significantly reduces accidents and also the cost for the company. The wearer typically interacts with the device using voice commands, so they're keeping their hands free to operate the forklift, which is always a good thing. And the picture on the right is what a technician would see when they're out to service a customer. So this would allow the wearer to see step-by-step guided instructions. They could get directions to the repair site if it were inside a building and they needed kind of indoor directions, and even request live assistance when needed. Again, all these commands are voice enabled, so the technician can focus on performing the repair instead of fiddling around with the glasses. Here's another company that's looking to kind of change how workers are performing their day-to-day activities. The Mile is an armband that goes on the forearm of the wearer, and based on the electric activities in the muscle, the device executes certain commands. Now, these armbands can integrate with Google Glasses, so the user can interact with apps kind of hands-free using hand gestures. So you can see a project manager here on the left kind of using gestures with her hands to execute certain actions, to update her checklist. On the right there, we have a person out in the field kind of checking the status of different kind of wind turbines. And then at the bottom there, you have a courier messenger trying to pick the best route for him to deliver the package that he's trying to deliver. So all those are great use cases we've seen so far, and I've included the links to all the videos so you can take a look at them when you get a chance. So as you can see, there isn't a shortage of challenges when it comes to wearables. We've already talked about a few of these challenges in the earlier part of the webinar with our 4 use cases, but I wanted to highlight a few others. Security and privacy are always the top concern anytime we're talking about enterprise apps. And honestly, the devices today kind of lack the level of security and organization would expect from an enterprise grade device. So, for instance, there is no stopping an employee from picking up one of those Theatro devices that we talked about earlier and saying, "Hey, log on John Smith," even if he's not John Smith. And although that's not as bad as a data breach or a security breach, it does create some risks associated with it. The other big challenge is user experience. Wearables are a novel way of accessing and capturing data. So when developers are building apps for wearables, they need to be extra sensitive to the context in which the user is going to be using the app. So for instance, it would be very hard to use voice commands in a noisy environment like construction sites, or expect users to interact with the device in situations when they can't do it with their hands. So for example, surgeons, chemists, the oil field workers that we talked about early on, the technicians that we talked about earlier on, and many, many more. So it definitely becomes a big issue when the device becomes needy, so to speak. And most wearables in the market today can heavily rely on a Wi-Fi network or a smartphone to remain connected to the backend systems. So, like we talked about with the Container Store, if the store Wi-Fi were to go down, or if a service rep is out in a remote part of town, using a wearable becomes a challenge because they don't have connectivity anymore, and these wearables can't operate in some sort of an offline mode. So manufacturers have already started to address this issue by adding offline capabilities, and then the devices can kind of sync back once they do get connected to the internet or the backend systems. And one last one that I want to highlight here is scalability. You know, as with smartphones and tablets, we've seen, you know, organizations would like to manage how they roll out the wearable devices and how they manage these wearable devices. But currently, there are very limited offerings in the market. But I don't think this is going to be the case for long. I think in the next 6 months, we will see existing MDM vendors and EMM vendors quickly add the management and deployment capabilities to the existing platform to extend it to wearables as well. And some of the other challenges that we talked about earlier kind of revolve around, you know, a bulky form factor, perhaps battery life, you know, barely lasting through a shift for an employee, and the price points for these devices right now is really high. So it'll be interesting to see how some of these get ironed out in the coming months, but we'll be keeping a very close watch. So I'm sure by now many of you are wondering, how can you get started with wearables in your organization and tackle some of these challenges? So by now we understand that the market for wearables is fairly immature. It's very fragmented and it's very volatile. But instead of kind of waiting on the sidelines, like, you know, organizations typically do, we would definitely recommend identifying some very simple use cases in the organization today, where you feel an employee could be more productive if they had certain information in front of them, or if they were not having to mess around with their laptop or tablet or a smartphone that we've given them today. I think I mentioned this earlier, but I'm going to say it again. I can't stress enough about how important it is to understand the context of the use case and how users are using the information today. I would encourage you guys to talk to your users, you know, perform some day-in-the-life visits to understand what the current challenges are, so you can design the appropriate solution. You know, just because we have the technology, we slap the technology on there, we can't really call it a solution. Understanding the user's need is also beneficial when it comes to identifying the ideal form factor. And I would really recommend kind of starting very small, you know, kind of like the title of the slide says. Just dip your toes in there, start with small functionality, similar to how a lot of the organizations are doing out there with very small pilot programs, small groups, kind of leverage existing infrastructure to create these proof of concepts. You know, by doing so, you'll essentially identify what are the kinks, you know, if the form factor is fitting well, if the user experience is too kludgy, and it'll help you iron out a lot of those things before you commit to a specific device or before you kind of scale it to a larger audience. And finally, the wearable kind of space is constantly changing. So you want to make sure that you carefully kind of evaluate the hardware and software vendors that meet your need, and make sure that your organization's goals for wearables align with the vision and the roadmap for that vendor. So that way, if the vendor were to decide to go in a different direction, you're not locked into the specific hardware or the specific software. All right, so I think that's all the information I had, and I'll go ahead and hand it over to Adam to kind of walk us through the Kickstarts.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nitin. That was a really good introduction to wearables in the enterprise. There's obviously a ton of opportunity for wearables in business, and we can see that some companies are dipping their toes into that space right now. Propelics is pretty excited to offer a brand new innovation session offering around wearables in the enterprise. This is a 3-day innovation session that can be run at your offices to look at a few things. One, to look at the art of the possible around wearables, what are other organizations doing, and then start some ideation and concept generation for a good wearables use case or many wearables use cases that are actually implementable I think sometimes with wearables, people focus on really futuristic use cases, and they're not taking the approach of what can we do today, what's possible, based on the reality of the technology where we are, and how do we get started. Another thing that we do in the wearables innovation session is look at the roadblocks to wearables adoption, look at some of the technologies that are available, what technologies fit in with your ecosystem, what technologies best match up to your use cases. And really the idea for the 3 days is not only to uncover good wearables use cases and look at the technology, but also provide you everything that you need, a tactical plan to get ready for a proof of concept around wearables. So again, this is a 3-day wearables innovation session. I'd encourage you to ask some questions for Nitin if you have any on the Q&A section of the WebEx panel there. We already have a few questions that have come in, and I'm going to get to that in a second. Just so you know, there's a special offer for our webinar attendees to have a free 1-hour mobile advisory call with our mobile strategist to talk about wearables or any other mobile-related topic. So Nitin, I think we should get going with some of the Q&A. And remember to continue to ask your questions. The first one I want to start with is just around maturity of this space. And it seems like we're in pretty early days of wearables. So can you talk a little bit about where we are in the maturity landscape, and more importantly for the folks on the call, when does it make sense to start investing in wearables and start thinking about this? Should you hold off? Should you get in it right now? Are there certain industries that if you're in that industry, you need to be thinking about it right away? Just what are your comments on that front?
Sure. I think we talked about kind of wearables in terms of the enterprise space are fairly new. It's been a recent development where enterprises are now starting to experiment with wearables. So it's in a fairly early stages, fairly immature, as I mentioned, and fragmented, meaning that the wearables don't talk to each other. So if I bought Google glasses and I bought a Bionim Numi, it wouldn't talk to each other. You have to do a lot of legwork before you can get them to kind of fully gain value out of them. But that being said, I don't think enterprises should kind of wait on the sidelines. I think there today exists use cases out there in the organizations, as we've seen from some of the organizations that we talked about today, that there are always opportunities. You want to make sure that you start simple, because the evolution, as we have seen for mobile technologies, is pretty quick. So by the time an organization does get ready, they feel prepared, they'll kind of already started falling behind. So I would highly encourage organizations to go out there and experiment, see what use cases fit best with wearables, see what form factors are fitting best, and start identifying some information, some pieces of data, some use cases that they can take from start to finish, within a very short period of time.
Good, and I agree. Yeah, it's important to just to get going, to think of use cases that are doable, use cases you can get out there, start testing the waters, because eventually you're going to have to jump into this. So I think it's good to start playing around with the technology and see what makes sense within your business. From a device perspective, there's a question from Jim around what happens if the device is misplaced and how is security assured? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So today there's no vendor offerings in the market to actually manage these devices as we would typically do with a smartphone. So if a smartphone were to be lost, we can quickly identify where it was lost, or we could remotely wipe it if there were some information on it. But today the market for this is fairly immature. There are, I think, maybe a few vendors out there, but again, they're not mainstream. So I think that will progress very quickly. I think in the next 6 months, we'll see vendors like AirWatch and Mobile Iron and other EMM offerings kind of start to fold in these wearable devices, because essentially organizations are looking for kind of managing these devices similarly to how they would manage a smartphone or tablet. So it's not going to be something new or something different from what we're doing today. Today, if you do lose your Google glasses, you lose them. But hopefully in the future, we will be able to kind of identify it. And I think a certain bit of it is just to do with the technology itself. So today, Google glasses don't have some kind of a 3G antenna in them. They mostly operate on Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. So it would be a little bit hard to locate that Google Glass unless it exists on some Wi-Fi network. So as we progress, as the hardware progresses, and as the software vendors realize that this is becoming more and more prevalent in the enterprise, I think that need will be met very quickly.
Yeah, I agree, and I know that a number of vendors are working on it today, the mobile device management vendors, on handling wearables, and like you said, those will be rolling out before we know it. The next question we have is regarding to, connectivity on these wearables devices, and can you talk a little bit about RFID and Bluetooth and ANC Plus and other ways of connecting? You mentioned the radio. How do you see this happening and playing out?
Yep. So I think the biggest challenge right now with wearables is most wearables lack a 3G antenna, and it, for the most part, it is on purpose. Hardware manufacturers are finding it very hard to extend battery life as soon as they start to shove in more and more sensors and more technology. So they're kind of trying to walk this fine line between, do we want to extend the battery life of this device by an hour or two, or do we want to provide them with the capability of staying connected no matter where we are? So I think different devices and different hardware manufacturers will kind of fork there. But for now, we're seeing a lot of devices just come in essentially with no 3G antenna, primarily due to the battery technology. So if they want to get enough of a buy-in, I think they will have to first address the battery issue. So that's what the manufacturers are doing today. And actually, I also feel that with the improvements in technologies like RFID and Bluetooth, I think we'll start to see the connectivity between devices also improve. So I think it's going to be a kind of a twofold or maybe even a threefold approach.
Great. The next question is from Elsie. Hi, Elsie. And the question is, of those companies piloting wearables in the enterprise, have any shared experiences around employee adoption, since wearables is so new, even in the consumer world? Typically, BYOD drives enterprise adoption, and of course that's what happened in the smartphone space. Wearables have been a little bit hard to come by or very expensive up until now. What do you foresee happening? Will this be something that companies provide, like in some of the use cases you saw, or do you see with the launch of the Apple Watch that it's going to be a big BYOD kind of revolution again in the wearable space? What are your thoughts on that?
So that's a great question. I think depending on the device, as you mentioned, if smartphones, the smartphones as the price points did get lower and lower, we did start to see a lot of the BYOD scenario, and it may similarly apply to maybe a Fitbit device or maybe even a smartwatch. But I think some of these specialized devices that we talked about today, like Vuzix and Bynum and XOI, these are fairly expensive devices. Actually, even the Google glasses has a $1,500 price tag on it. So I think until the price point for those devices comes down, I think BYOD may not happen. I want to be cautious on how I use my words, but I think it's a little bit hard for employees to kind of justify a $1,500 price tag on these just for their work purposes. So I think mostly it will be corporate-owned, corporate-managed devices that we're seeing in the enterprise. And in certain cases, like, I want email on my smartwatch, or I want, kind of use my Fitbit device to capture health information so I can get a discount on my health insurance, or get some kind of points to make purchases in my company store or get company flag. That use case is definitely possible. But the more specialized ones, we're probably thinking it's going to be company facing.
I know you have a lot of opinions on the Apple Watch, and they've announced it. Obviously, it hasn't released yet, but can you provide us some of your thoughts about, the potential or what it opens up, or, the impact that you foresee on the enterprise from the announcement of the watch?
Yeah, sure. So, the Apple Watch is obviously been something that has been talked about for years now. And they're definitely not the first to market, and they're although they're much nicer about their designs and their personalization, to a consumer, they're not offering anything different than what some of the other smartwatches out there are doing today. So I think in terms of bringing it to the enterprise, there might be folks out there, and it may be a smash hit, because I think the software will propel the sales of the hardware, just like with everything else, Apple. I think with Apple Pay and how it integrates with the phone, I think we'll start to see a lot of that come into the enterprise. But apart from that, I'm not too sure this iteration of the iWatch, or I shouldn't say iWatch, of the Apple Watch, is what's going to kind of flood the enterprise. I think maybe in the next iteration, once it truly does display some value, because so far they haven't really shown how the watch works with the phone or what kind of battery life. So there is a lot of unknown at this point. And before kind of I take a stance, I think it will be beneficial for me to just look at how the next few iterations work out.
Yeah, I think you're right, and like you said, it's going to be really software driven, and there are a lot of possibilities. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. And I see with the price point and the mass market appeal that Apple has, it might be the impetus for wearables really to take off. So it will be interesting to watch and see how it plays out, and then how the implications really parlay into the enterprise. I think there are no more questions at this time, so we're going to call it a wrap and close out the webinar. Thank you very much for participating. Please visit our website, learn about our innovation sessions and our Kickstarts, and take advantage of our offer of a 1-hour free advisory call with some mobile strategists. Again, the slides and the recording will be available on our website, and I'll send you an email with a link on how to grab those. Thanks a lot, and have a great day. Bye, guys.